With Solar 3.0 available for a little over a month now, it's safe to say Solar has been changed in a lot of unexpected ways that aren't all good, and I think some Warlock mains were left feeling a little underwhelmed by the changes initially, myself included. But after spending some more time with Solar 3.0, I've definitely changed my tune on how potent Solar 3.0 for Warlock actually is. With the right combination of aspects and fragments, you can have constant health regen, insane movement and escapability from fights, and generous ability regen. If you're feeling underwhelmed by Solar 3.0 for Warlock, or you're looking to optimize your Solar 3.0 build for the Crucible, then this video is for you. Today I'm going to cover the aspects and fragments to give you the best synergy on Solar Warlock, along with the stats, exotics, and armor that allow you to excel in the Crucible. Now let's get into the video, and if you find these tips helpful, consider dropping a like as it helps support the channel. Jumping right in, and we're going to be starting with our super, and in a funny way we kind of have less choices, but not really, because they consolidated Daybreak into one instead of having the two separate trees as before. And our other option is Well of Radiance. If you don't know, Well of Radiance no longer grants the overshield, it's just a lot based on your resilience, and honestly I feel like it's worse in PvP somehow. I feel like I always get killed out of it. Maybe that's just me, but I personally prefer Daybreak. I love the mobility with the fact that you can combine a lot of the abilities that used to be on top tree only or bottom tree only for Dawnblade before Solar 3.0. You can now combine them for Daybreak on top of having the Icarus Dash if that's the aspect we choose. And so this is pretty nice. Obviously the cooldown is not great. I think the cooldown should be reduced because it's now not nearly as potent as maybe it once was. I think bringing it down in line to the 9 or 8 minutes for a base cooldown would be more reasonable. I think it having the longest in the game is actually, or one of the longest, is pretty silly. But either way, we're going with Daybreak because I feel like Well of Radiance is just not that great. Moving on to our abilities, and we're going to be sticking with Healing Rift. Now another change that they made that I don't know how much I love it, but I get it from a balancing standpoint, is they made a Phoenix Dive a class ability, which before used to be like kind of like an air move. It was something you could do in combination with your Healing Rift. And while this is cool and it's kind of like, you know, the shadow dive or whatever the hell that hunters do when they dive to the ground, you can do this to get a burst of healing as well as heal nearby enemies. I find for the cooldown, when you're getting the same amount of cooldown as a Rift, it's just not really worth the investment, and Healing Rift is just so strong for when you place it on cover and you're able to lock down like a portion of the map, and especially if you're good at peek shotting, you're able to peek in and out of your Rift or in and out of cover while still staying in your Rift. It's just too powerful to counter, and it's going to give you longer healing or more healing overall than Phoenix Dive. Phoenix Dive in combination with Healing Rift I think was really good before, but if I'm forced to choose one, I'm going with Healing Rift. Empowering Rift, also a decent option, but again, because of the change to the Empowering Rift and the fact that it keeps you from two-tapping or basically two-tapping with anything, we're going to be sticking with Healing Rift for that survivability. And what you're going to see throughout this build, and as I talk through our aspects and fragments, it's all about survivability. For our movement, we are sticking with Burst Glide. I'm not even going to talk about either of these. I mean, they're fine, but this is going to give you the most linear, most momentum as you kind of burst around the map or move around the map, and allows you to kind of Warlock skate, air quotes, as efficiently as possible. So this is going to allow you to get around the map as quickly as possible without being too floaty. Next, we have our melee, and this is between Incinerator Snap and Celestial Fire, which now can actually scorch opponents when they went and buffed Solar 3.0 for Warlock and some other classes recently. And with that, I'm going to say that you're still going to be better off going with Celestial Fire. Incinerator Snap is cool. It'll get you some kills here and there. It's not completely useless like I thought it was initially, but overall, it's, unless you are binding your melee to another key or button, it's not going to proc when you're up close to people unless you proc it to another button. Celestial Fire will, you don't have to rebind it to another key. Anytime you press it, no matter what range you're at with your opponent, you're gonna, as long as you have the charged melee, you're gonna use your Celestial Fire to kill your enemy, which I really like. I don't like the idea of having to proc another button or key for my melee with Incinerator Snap. On top of the fact that Incinerator Snap just doesn't do nearly as much damage, and the tracking isn't nearly as strong. They also recently buffed the range of Celestial Fire, so it actually tracks further and has no damage drop off. And so this is just going to be a more consistent, more powerful, have more utility overall than Incinerator Snap. Incinerator Snap also has terrible range compared to Celestial Fire. So this is going to be great for you get a couple shots on your opponent or even a sniper shot or any kind of damage and you want to kind of try to finish them off from far away. You can kind of throw that Celestial Fire. This is also really good for one of the fragments down here that we'll be talking about a little bit later, but I'll tie that together. Getting into our grenade, we are going to be running healing grenade, and we have so many different options. Why are you choosing healing grenade? Because it's just so damn strong. All of these are awesome. Solar grenades, awesome. Firebolt with a low cooldown can actually have some good utility. Obviously, fusion grenades have been up and coming, especially if you're using Touch of Flame with the double explosion on fusions. And then, you know, I've always wanted to use trip mine grenades, so it's funny that now that I finally have them, I'm still not using them. But healing grenade is just so powerful. It really can turn around a fight. And with how we lay out our aspects and fragments on this build, this healing grenade is really going to be a focus of this build for us. And so I really like the ability to step behind cover, heal up, and then re-challenge a fight. It is very jarring for an enemy when you slide out and you're suddenly full health, and you're also restoring your health at the same time. So not only do you get a big chunk of your health back, but you also proc the restoration, where you're consistently regenerating your health, and damage does not interrupt that, which is pretty nice. And so I think this just gives so many benefits on top of being able to survive. It also allows you to re-challenge things maybe that you shouldn't normally, but because of that restoration on top of the curing or the burst and healing you get from these healing nades, it just really makes it a no-brainer option in my opinion. Getting into our aspects, and we have Touch of Flame. So this is where your healing, solar, firebolt, and fusion grenades have enhanced functionality. And for our healing grenade, it's going to improve the strength of our cure and restoration effects applied. And so what this does for us when we use Touch of Flame with healing grenade, it's going to give us cure times 2 in 6 seconds when combined with some other fragments of restoration, which is just insane, because when we have double that times 2 cure, it's just gonna give you even bigger, basically 75% of your health back when you throw that grenade at your feet or on the ground to heal yourself, on top of getting the consistent health regen for 6 seconds after that, again when combined with certain fragments. So that's why it really makes it a no-brainer. I also really like this just to combine with any of the other grenades, just to make them a little bit more potent. It's definitely very nice. Our other one is Icarus Dash, and Icarus Dash, I feel like at this point needs no introduction, but essentially this is going to allow us to get in and out of bad situations, maneuver around the map very quickly, reposition as quickly as possible, and just kind of fly around, be constantly on the move, and constantly getting the upper hand when it comes to positioning against our enemies. And so this one, I think, no matter what you other choose, and we'll talk about heat rises in a second, whatever you choose in this other aspect slot, at the end of the day, that's up to you, but do not choose Icarus Dash. Icarus Dash is definitely the one you're going to want to use here, on top of the fact that while airborne, if you're rapidly defeating targets now, you also get cure or a burst of kind of healing if you're in the air and getting quick kills quickly. And this also applies in super when we're using Daybreak, which is awesome. So obviously using this with Well of Radiance would not make sense in some ways. Next, talking about heat rises, and heat rises, with all the in-air accuracy changes and how the fact that like so many weapons are now inaccurate in the air, even with this, I think it's 70 plus 70 in-air accuracy this gives you, I just don't find it valuable. I know you can consume your grenade, also grants like healing around you and all that, but it only grants you times 3 cure and no restoration. So if you're not using, so when you're using heat rises, it doesn't give you the restoration, it just gives you the cure. And I'd rather have the times 2 cure with the restoration effects as well, because the cure is nice, but it's the restoration that really throws off your enemies when they're shooting you and your health is constantly like ticking back up and refilling. That really throws people off and puts a lot of pressure on them to continue to hit their shots. For heat rises, I don't play in the air at all. I never have, never will. If you're someone that really enjoys getting those crazy angles in the air and floating up, more power to you. But if given the state of things when it comes to in-air accuracy, especially for special weapons, I just don't find this a good investment right now. I'd rather use Touch of Flame and get an even more powerful healing grenade to pair along with my ability to maneuver around and fly around the map using Icarus Dash. For our fragments, we are going to be first using Ember of Benevolence. Applying Restoration Cure or Radiant to allies grants increased grenade melee and class ability regeneration for a short duration, and unfortunately gives us -10 discipline. And so I really like this because a lot of times when you're throwing down that healing grenade, in a lot of scenarios you're going to be surrounded by your teammates or have teammates near you, and this allows you to just proc additional energy regen across the board for all your abilities essentially. Next, we have Ember of Torches. Powered melee attacks against combatants make you and nearby allies radiant. And this gives you radiant. When you're radiant, it gives you about, I think it's a 10% damage bonus in PvP, which is nothing mind-blowing by any means, but it can make a difference in some of your fights, especially when you combine Ember of Torches with Celestial Fire. It's definitely nice to be able to throw your Celestial Fire, throw your melee, hit some enemies from far away, and grant radiance, not only for you, but you also any allies that may be near you, just to give yourself and everyone else around you that a little additional damage buff, so that way you can maybe kill an enemy a little bit faster than they might have been expecting. When I've been able to proc radiant using this method with Celestial Fire, it's allowed me to clean up some kills or melt some enemies very quickly, because again, 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but if you times that by each bullet, and if you're hitting headshots and all those kind of things, you're gonna melt enemies pretty quickly with this. I think it's always helps with the forgiveness of weapons when you increase the damage output. Next, we have Ember of Solace, and I really like this one because it really ties into a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. So your radiant and restoration effects applied to you have increased duration. I love this because for our healing nade, this is going to allow that restoration to give us that 6 seconds, especially when compared with Touch of Flame. So it allows us to get that health regen for 6 seconds. And then on top of that, it makes our radiant last even longer. I think it puts it in the double digits in terms of seconds, but it is substantial. And I do notice it when I don't use Ember of Solace, like how short the duration on radiant is. It makes it almost useless to run Ember of Torches without running Ember of Solace to really get the most out of that radiant buff. And this really allows us to get the most out of all the buffs that we're trying to proc while running this build, whether that be restoration or radiant. By having this, it's just going to make sure we have those effects up as long as possible. And then lastly, we have Ember of Beams. Your solar super projectiles have stronger target acquisition and gives us plus 10 intellect. And this is great because if you remember back last season for Top Tree Dawn, it had really good tracking. So in Daybreak, it had really good tracking on Bottom Tree Dawnblade. And essentially Ember of Beams is going to allow us to get a similar level of tracking with this fragment. So that is why I use it, because it just helps with the forgiveness of you're throwing your swords in Daybreak, because I find when I'm not using this, I can hit my swords, but it's a lot less forgiving. And with Ember of Beams, the tracking is just so good. On top of the plus 10 intellect, just bring that super cooldown a whole tier is really nice. So I'll definitely take this, especially again when I don't really find anything super attractive that can actually be used in PvP outside of these fragments here. And I think when you take all these fragments, put them together, combine them with these aspects, and you know the abilities we've chosen with Celestial Fire and Healing Grenade, it really creates a really potent synergistic build where everything you proc is gonna have a longer duration, and it has ability to proc more ability regen, especially if you're healing yourself and your teammates, on top of helping your super be a little bit more effective with that super projectile tracking. And with Ember of Solace, it's all gonna last as long as possible, which is great. And then you combine on the fact that with your ability to have that ability regen, your survivability when using healing grenades, and pair that with Icarus Dash, it just makes you so hard to kill in this build. And now that we've covered abilities, aspects, fragments, and our super, I'm gonna dive into my armor and stats and like the weapons I'm using, all that for you guys, so you can go and take that and dominate in the Crucible. All right, so getting into our stats first, and this is something, there's been a lot of changes on different stats this season, and we're gonna start with the first one, and that is gonna be resilience. So resilience is now tied to the amount of flinch you take, and so this is something that I absolutely love. I love that they've made resilience more important and actually matter. And so for me, I still find the sweet spot is still 6 to 7 because it keeps me from detracting too much from my other stats. But if you can get your resilience up to 100 and still get a nice distribution of stats here, then I highly recommend that, because you're going to be just pinpoint with your accuracy, and taking damage is not going to throw you off nearly as much. And I think when you really start getting to the higher resilience stats, pair that with unflinching mods, you really do notice the difference. So resilience definitely a much more important stat, especially for PvP. And so this is something I highly recommend investing in, as long as you can balance out your other stats nicely. Next, we have recovery, and I always recommend getting to 100 recovery, because this is also tied to your Rift ability cooldown. on top of the fact that it just ties into our overall theme of survivability. Having high recovery allows you to recover quicker in between fights, or if you have to run away and get away from an enemy that maybe you were losing that initial fight to, it's going to buy you those extra precious seconds to get your health back a little bit quicker, so you can jump back in and re-challenge that opponent quicker. And then I think we combine this with the faster rift ability cooldown, with our healing nades, restoration, the curing, all of that, it just is a no-brainer to make sure recovery is 100, not just for this build, but always on Warlock. Next, we have our discipline, so it controls the cooldown of our grenade. I'm rocking tier 7, and this brings me to 45-second cooldown for my healing nade, which is pretty damn good, and I don't think it makes sense to go much higher than this, unless again you just have those stats lying around that you don't know what to do with. Feel free to throw them in discipline, but I think as you can see, going from tier 7 to tier 8, you go from 45 to 41, so you really start seeing those diminishing returns. And I think tier 6, 7 is really a sweet spot when using healing grenades, to make sure you're just getting it at every 50 to 45 seconds or so, which is definitely really nice. Next, we have intellect. And again, I think around tier 6, tier 7, again, is a sweet spot for this. A lot of these abilities, you're gonna start seeing diminishing returns after tier 7. But I think looking at this right here, from tier 7 to tier 8, there might be a case to be made to go all the way up to tier 8 for Dawnblade. But personally, I find the sweet spot for me, again, is around tier 7, tier 6, because then I can invest those leftover stats, or the stats I'd be saving, in other areas of my character. And then next I have strength. And again, this is for our Celestial Fire. I don't go too crazy here. I just like to get around the 1 minute-ish mark. So personally, if I get this down, if I get this to tier 6, I'd probably be a little bit happier around with that 1 minute and 3 second cooldown. 1 minute 12 is fine, it's not the end of the world. But again, I would try to get this around the 1 minute mark. And lastly, we have mobility. Increases your movement speed and maximum jump height. I don't care about this stat at all. I don't invest in this stat at all. I don't feel like it has any impact. I mean, again, you can invest in it maybe up to tier 4 if you really wanted to. I think it does help with your strafe speed a little bit, but at the end of the day, I don't find it super beneficial, especially when I can put it into things like resilience, which have much more of an impact now. If one day they change mobility to have some kind of other crazy impact like they did with resilience, maybe we'll revisit it. But until then, I feel like I'm much better off investing in these other stats. All right, for our armor and weapons, I'm gonna just cruise through the armor really quickly here, because honestly, it hasn't changed much from season to season, because in my opinion, nothing beats Apathettic aspects or transversus steps. I don't have my transversus steps on me, but Apathettic aspects, especially with the new ornament, hard to beat. But starting with our helmet, I do recommend running targeting mods for whatever your weapon of choice is. Again, I primarily have been using either hand cannons or pulse rifles, and so I'm using hand cannon targeting for both of those, or sorry, hand cannon targeting and pulse rifle targeting for each one. For there, like I said, Apathettic aspects, just having insanely high handling and fast response time of your weapons is, I think, so invaluable, on top of having better melee range, which can be good and bad. It feels like sometimes the melee is whiff because of the increased melee range, but there are times where you do notice the difference on some of the melees that you land. But I think more importantly, the ability to swap and have those weapons ready when it comes to like ADSing, aiming down sights as quickly as possible, and your weapons just feeling super responsive. I absolutely love this. When I take off Apathettic, it's night and day difference in terms of how my weapons feel and my ability to respond to situations, because I feel like I'm responding faster than my weapons are, and so that's why I never really take these things off in the Crucible. For our chest piece, I am running double unflinching hand cannon, and again, all trying to make sure my hand cannon is consistent as possible, especially combined with the resilience changes, reducing that flinch even further. Really noticeable, in my opinion, when it comes to the consistency of your weapon, in my case, a hand cannon. For our boots, I am running shotgun holster, because that is the seasonal mod, or one of the seasonal mods, which just allows me to make sure my shotgun is always loaded, especially since I spend a lot of time with my primary out. This allows me to ensure that when I do eventually switch back to my shotgun, it is reloaded, because I am notorious for not reloading my shotgun. I usually fire off my shotgun a couple times and then I'm primary all day, and then I go back to it and it's empty. So that's, I really find a lot of value in this mod. And then I'm using Radiant Light to give me a huge 20+ stat boost to strength, which is going to help us get Celestial Fire a little bit more frequently. And then I just threw on Invigoration just because I just to fill the slot because of my OCD. I wouldn't read too much on that. These are definitely the more important aspects. And then for our class abilities, so right now you can see I'm using Classy Restoration. And so this is activating your solar class ability grants you Restoration, which is just crazy powerful when using your Rift. You can only pop your Rift and then on top of that, you get the Restoration with it. And it makes you just like a tank when you're standing in that Rift. And so as you can see, this is a seasonal mod. If this wasn't the seasonal mod or when this mod goes away, I will be using quick charge still. This allows you to get just really have your greatly increase the reload speed of your fusion rifle, shotguns, submachine guns, and swords. And so that's very nice for just pairing with the Ophidian aspects to have your swap speed just be absolutely insane when it comes to your shotguns or SMGs, whatever you prefer. But as of right now, I'm using Classy Restoration to just really double down, go as hard as possible on the recovery and survivability of Solar 3.0, which I think is where Warlock really excels. For our weapons, I am running a combination of things. I think this season I switched between different weapons more than ever before, but I'm using two different types of combinations typically. I'm using a hand cannon and a shotgun of some kind, either a slug or a pellet, or I'm using a pulse rifle and an SMG. So for example, if I were running, if I were just trials this weekend, I've been running No Time to Explain, and then I've been running Shayura's Wrath, my Adept Shayura's Wrath. So either that, or like if you have a really good funnel web, I have a pretty decent one here. Just for those closer range, mid to close range engagements, SMGs are super powerful right now. If you have a Teraba and you compare that with a different 340, obviously that would be an amazing combination. And so that is one combination I've been using. So double primary there, which is kind of funny to see, but also kind of fun. I really do enjoy this loadout. I feel like it's very well. I just feel like this weapon combination is very well rounded because you have the long to maybe mid-ish range, but then you definitely have the close to mid-range lockdown with your SMG, which is really nice. But if I'm not running this, then I'm running probably like Thorn in either my Sojourner's Tale or my Matador, some higher handling shotguns with quick access sling. And I really enjoy this combination still because of the quick handling. And I think with Thorn and having that burn, even though it doesn't stop restoration, it is something that does add those additional ticks of damage. So maybe they do get a lot of health back, but hopefully not quite as much as maybe they would have if we weren't using Thorn. So I've just found this super valuable. And I think if I was using another hand cannon, I'm either using quick access sling to just further help that ready speed. But since I'm using Ophidians, I've actually been using backup mag, give me 14 rounds in my hand cannon magazine. And so I'm still working on getting a crafted Austringer. So if I had that, I would probably be using that also. But as of right now, this is what I'm looking at from a special weapon and primary weapon standpoint. And this is what I really would recommend. I really encourage you all to check out the Pulse and SMG combo if you haven't already, but also the hand cannon shoddy classic is still alive and well in this current meta. As far as heavy, I just use whatever kind of works. Ideally, I would like to use Gallahorn if I'm not using an exotic in my other two slots, just because you can get a lot of multi-kills with this heavy weapon. But other than that, I just kind of use whatever. I'll often use my Tomorrow's Answer, just another rocket instead of Gallahorn or a legendary version or a legendary option as a rocket launcher.